Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Western Canon Challenge, where we are reading the entirety of the Western literary canon out loud. Today we are continuing in The Well at the World's End, a tale by William Morris, and we are up to chapter 21, entitled A Battle in the Mountains. And with that said, I'll get started. When it was morning, they arose early and ate a morsel, and Clement gave freely to the warden and his helpmate on behalf of the fellowship. Then they saddled their nags and did on the loads and departed. And the way was evil otherwise, but it was downhill, and all waters ran east. All day they rode, and at even, when the sun had not quite set, they pitched their camp at the foot of a round knoll amidst a valley, where was water and grass. And looking down thence, they had a sight of the fruitful plain, wherein lay Cheaping Knowe, all goodly blue in the distance. This was a fair place and lovely, and great ease would they have had there, were it not that they must keep watch and ward with more pains than theretofore. For Clement deemed it as good as certain that the wild men would fall upon them that night. But all was peaceful that night through, and in the morning they gat to the way speedily, riding with their armor on, and their bows bent. And 3 of the men-at-arms rode ahead to espy the way. So it befell that they had not ridden 2 hours, ere came back the foreriders with the tidings that the pass next below them was thick with strong thieves. The fellowship were as then in such a place that they were riding a high bare ridge, and could not be assailed to the advantage of the thieves, if they abode where they were. Whereas if they went forward, they must needs go down with the road into the dale that was beset by the wild men. Now they were 62 all told, but of these but a score of men-at-arms, besides Ralph and Clement, who was a stout fighter when need was. Of the others some were but lads, and of the chapmen were 3 old men, and more than 1 blencher besides. However, all men were armed, and they had many bows, and some of the chapmen's knaves were fell archers. So they took counsel together, and to some it seemed better to abide the onset on their vantage ground. But to Clement and the older men-at-arms this seemed of no avail, for though they could see the plain country down below, they would have no succor of it, and Clement bade them think how the night would come at last, and that the longer they abode, the greater would be the gathering of the strong thieves, so that all things considered, it were better to fall on at once and try the adventure of the valley. And this, after some talk, they yea said all, save a few who held their skin so dear that their wits wandered somewhat. So these timorous ones, they bade guard the sumpter beasts and their loads. And even so they did, and abode a little, while the men-at-arms and the bowmen went forward without more ado. And Ralph rode betwixt Clement and the captain of the men-at-arms. Presently they were come close to the place where the way went down to the valley, cleaving through a clay bent, so that the slippery sides of the cleft went up high to right and left. Wherefore by good hap there were no big stones anigh to roll down upon them. Moreover, the way was short, and they rode 6 abreast down the pass, and were soon through the holloway. As he rode, Ralph saw a few of the strong thieves at the nether end, where the pass widened out, and they let fly some arrows at the chapmen, which did no hurt, though some of the shafts rattled on their armor of the companions. But when Clement saw that folk, and heard the noise of their shouting, he lifted up a great axe, and he bore and cried, "St. Agnes for the mercers!" and set spurs to his horse. So did they all, and came clattering and shouting down the steep road like a stone out of a sling, and drave right into the valley one and all, and the would-be laggards followed after, for they were afraid to be left behind. The wild men, who, save for the wide shields which they bore, were but evilly armed, mostly in skin of beasts, made no countenance of defence, but fled all they might towards the steep slopes of the valley. They then turned and fell to shooting, for the companions durst not pursue in haste, lest they should be scattered and overwhelmed by the multitude of foemen. But they drew up along the south side of the valley, and had the mastery of the road, so that this first bout was without bloodshedding. albeit the thieves still shot in their weak bows from the hillside, but scarce hurt a man. Then the bowmen of the fellowship fell to shooting at the wild men, while the men-at-arms breathed their horses, and the sumpter beasts were gathered together behind them. For they had no dread of abiding there a while, whereas behind them the ground was broken into a steep, shaly cliff, bushed here and there with tough bushes, so that no man could come up it save by climbing with hand and knee, and that not easily. Now the archers had shot a good while, and some of the thieves had fallen before them, and men were in good heart because of the flight of the wild men. And seeing that these still hung about the slopes, Ralph cried out, "Master Clement, and thou, Captain, sure it will be ill done to leave these men unbroken behind us, lest they follow us and hang about our hindermost, slaying us both men and horses." "Even so," quoth the captain, who was a man of few words, "let us go. But do thou, Clement, abide by the stuff with the lads and bowmen." Then he cried out loud, "Saint Christopher to aid!" and shook his rein, and all they who were clad in armor and well mounted spurred on with him against the strong thieves. But these, when they saw the onset of the horsemen, but drew a little up the hillside and stood fast, and some of the horses were hurt by their shot. So the captain bade draw rein and off horse, while Clement led his bowmen nigher. And they shot well together, and hindered the thieves from closing round the men-at-arms, or falling on the horses. So then the companions went forward stoutly on foot, and entered into battle of the thieves, and there was the thrusting and the hewing great. For the foemen bore axes and mauls and spears, and were little afraid, having the vantage ground, and they were lithe and strong men, though not tall. Ralph played manfully, and was hurt by a spear above the knee, but not grievously. So he heeded it not, but cleared a space all about him with great strokes of the Upmead's blade. Then, as the wild men gave back, there was one of them who stood his ground and let drive a stroke of a long-handled hammer at him. But Ralph ran in under the stroke, and caught him by the throat, and drew him out of the press. And even therewith the wild men broke up before the onset of the all-armed carles, and fled up the hill, and the men-at-arms followed them but a little, for their armor made them unspeedy. So they took no more of those men, though they slew some, but turned about and gathered round Ralph, and made merry over his catch, for they were joyous with the happy end of battle. And Clement, who had left his bowmen when the companions were mingled with the wild men, was there amidst the nighest. Said Ralph to him, "Well, have I got me a servant and thrall good cheap?" "Yea," said Clement, "if thou deem a polecat a likely hound." Said the captain, "Put thy sword through him, knight." Quoth another, "Let him run uphill, and our bowmen shall shoot a match at him." "Nay," said Ralph, "they have done well with their shooting, let them rest. As to my thrusting my sword through the man, Captain, I had done that before, had I been so minded. At any rate, I will ask him if he will serve me truly. Otherwise he seemeth a strong carle and a handy. How sayest thou, lad? Did I take thee fairly?" "Yea," said the man, "thou art a strong lad." He seemed to fear the swords about him but little, and forsooth he was a warrior-like man, and not ill-looking. He was of middle height, strong and well knit, with black hair like a beast's mane for shagginess, and bright blue eyes. He was clad in a short coat of grey homespun, with an ox-skin habergeon laced up over it. He had neither helm nor hat, nor shoes, but hosen made of woolen clout tied about his legs. His shield of wood and ox-hide lay on the ground a few paces off, and his hammer beside it, which he had dropped when Ralph first handled him, but a great ugly knife was still girt to him. Now Ralph saith to him, "Which wilt thou, be slain or serve me?" Said the carle, grinning, yet not foully, "Guess if I would not rather serve thee." "Wilt thou serve me truly?" said Ralph. "Why not?" quoth the carle. "Yet I warn thee that if thou beat me, save in hot blood, I shall put a knife into thee when I may." "Oh," said one, "thrust him through now at once, Lord Ralph." "Nay, I will not," said Ralph. "He hath warned me fairly. Maybe he will serve me truly. Master Clement, wilt thou lend me a horse for my man to ride?" "Yea," said Clement, Yet I misdoubt me of thy new squire. Then he turned to the men-at-arms and said, No tarrying, my masters. To horse and away before they gather gain. So they mounted and rode away from that valley of the pass, and Ralph made his man ride beside him. But the man said to him as soon as they were riding, Take note that I will not fight against my kindred. None biddeth thee so, said Ralph, but do thou take heed that if thou fight against us, I will slay thee outright. Said the man, A fair bargain. Well, said Ralph, I will have thy knife of thee, lest it tempt thee, as is the wont of cold iron, and a maiden's body. Nay, master, quoth the man, leave me my knife, as thou art a good fellow, and in 2 hours' time we shall be past all peril of my people. And when we come down below, I will slay thee as many as thou wilt, so it be out of the kindred. Forsooth down there evil they be, and unkinsome. So be it, my lad, said Ralph, laughing, keep thy knife, but hang this word of mine thereon, that if thou slay any man of this fellowship, save me, I will rather flay thee alive than slay thee. Quoth the carle, That is the bargain then, and ye say it. Good, said Ralph, now tell me thy name. Bull Shockhead, said the carle. But now the fellowship took to riding so fast down the slopes of the mountains on a far better road that talking together was not easy. They kept good watch both behind and ahead, nor were they set upon again, though whiles they saw clumps of men on the hillsides. So after a while, when it was a little past noon, they came down to the lower slopes on the mountains and the foothills, which were green and unstony. And thereon were to be seen cattle and neat-herds and shepherds, and here and there the garth of a homestead, and fenced acres about it. So now that they were come down into the peopled parts, they displayed the banners of their fellowships, to wit, the Agnes, the White Fleece, the Christopher, and the Ship and Nicholas, which last was the banner of the faring knights of Whitwall. But Ralph was glad to ride under the banner of St. Nicholas, his friend, and deemed that luck might rather come to him thereby. But they displayed their banners now, because they knew that no man of the peopled parts would be so hardy as to fall upon the chapmen, of whom they looked to have many matters for their use and pleasure. So now that they felt themselves safe, they stayed them, and sat down by a fair little stream, and ate their dinner of such meat and drink as they had. And Ralph departed his share with his thrall, and the man was hungry and ate well. So Clement said mockingly, Thou feedest thy thrall over well, lord, even for a king's son. Is it so that thou art minded to fatten him and eat him? Then some of the others took up the jest, and bade the carle refrain him of the meat, so that he might not fatten, and might live the longer. He hearkened to them, and knit his brows, and looked fiercely from one to the other. But Ralph laughed aloud, and shook his finger at him, and refrained him. And his wrath ran off him, and he laughed, and shoved the victual into him doughtily, then sighed for pleasure when he had made an end, and drunk a draught of wine. Chapter 22. Ralph talks with Bull Shockhead. When they rode on again, Ralph rode beside Bull, who was merry and blithe now that he was full of meat and drink. And he spake anon, So thou art a king's son, master. I deemed from the first that thou wert of lineage. As for these churls of chapmen, and the sworders whom they wage, they know not the name of their mother's mother, nor have they heard one word of the beginner of their kindred, and their deeds are like unto their kinlessness. And are thy deeds so good? Said Ralph. Are they ill? Said Bull, when they are done against the foemen? Said Ralph, And are all men your foemen, who pass through these mountains? All, said Bull, but they be of the kindred of their known friends. Well, Bull, said Ralph, I like thy deeds little, that thou shouldest ravish men and women from their good life, and sell them for a price into toil and weariness and stripes. Said Bull, How much worse do we than the chapman by his debtor, and the lord of the manor by his villein? Said Ralph, Far worse, if ye did but know it, poor men. Quoth Bull, But I neither know it, nor can know it. Nay, not when thou sayest it, for it is not so. And look you, master, this life of a bought thrall is not such an exceeding evil life, for oft they be dealt with softly and friendly, and have other thralls to work for them under their whips. Ralph laughed. Which shall I make thee, friend Bull, the upper or the under? Bull reddened, but said naught. Said Ralph, Or where shall I sell thee, that I may make the best penny out of my good luck and valiancy? Bull looked chopfallen. Nay, said he in a wheedling voice, thou wilt not sell me, thou, for I deem that thou wilt be a good master to me. And, he broke into sudden heat hereat, if I have another master, I shall surely slay him whate'er betide. Ralph laughed again and said, Seest thou what an evil craft ye follow, when thou deemest it better to be slain with bitter torments, as thou shouldest be if thou slewest thy master, than to be sold to any master save one exceeding good? Bull held his peace hereat, but presently he said, Well, be our craft good or evil, it is gainful, and whiles there is prey taken right good, which for my part I would not sell, once I had my hands thereon. Yea, women? Said Ralph. Even so, said Bull. Such as one was taken by my kinsman, Bull Nosy, but a little while agone, whom he took down to the market at Cheaping Knowe, as I had not done if I had once my arms about her, for she was as fair as a flower, and yet so well built that she could bear as much as a strong man in some ways. And saith Nosy, when she was taken, there was no weeping or screeching in her, but patience rather and quietness, and intent to bear all and live. Master, may I ask thee a question? Ask on, said Ralph. Said Bull, the pair of beads about thy neck, whence came they? They were the gift of a dear friend, said Ralph. A woman? Quoth Bull. Yea, said Ralph. Now is this strange, said Bull, and I wot not what it may betoken. But this same woman had about her neck a pair of beads as like to thine as if they had been the very same. Did this woman give thee the beads? For I will say this of thee, master, that thou art well nigh as likely a man as she is a woman. Ralph sighed, for this talk of the woman and the beads brought all the story into his mind, so that it was as if he saw it all a-doing again, the lady of the wildwood led along to death before he delivered her, and their flight together from the water of the oak, and that murder of her in the desert. And betwixt the diverse deeds of the day, this had of late become somewhat dim to him. Yet after his grief came to joy, that this man also had seen the damsel, whom his dream of the night had called Dorothea, and that he knew of her captors, wherefore by his means he might come on her and deliver her. Now he spake aloud, Nay, it was not she that gave them to me, but yet were I fain to find this woman that thou sawest, for I look to meet a friend whenas I meet her. So tell me, dost thou think that I may cheapen her of thy kinsman? Bull shook his head and said, It may be, or it may be that he hath already sold her to one who heedeth not treasure so much as fair flesh, and fair is hers beyond most. But, Lord, I will do my best to find her for thee, as thou art a king's son, and no ill master, I deem. Do that, quoth Ralph, and I in turn will do what more I may for thee besides making thee free. And therewith he rode forward, that he might get out of earshot, for Bull's tongue seemed like to be long, and presently he heard laughter behind him, as the carle began jesting and talking with the chapman lads. Chapter 23. Of the town of Cheaping Knowe. Now when it was evening, they pitched their camp down in the plain fields amidst the tall elm trees, and had their banners still flying over the tents to warn all comers of what they were. But the next morning the chapmen and their folk were up betimes to rummage their loads, and to array their wares for the market, and they got not to the road before mid-morning. Meantime of their riding, Ralph had more talk with Bull, who said to him, Fair lord, I rede thee, when thou art in the market of Cheaping Knowe, bid Master Clement bring thee to the thrall merchant, and trust me that if such a fair image as that we were speaking of hath passed through his hands within these 3 months, he will remember it, and then thou shalt have at least some tell of what hath befallen her but a little while ago. That seemed good rede to Ralph. And when they went on their way, he rode beside Clement, and asked him many things concerning Cheaping Knowe, and at last about the thrall market therein. And Clement said that though he dealt not in such wares, he had often seen them sold, and knew the master of that market. And when Ralph asked if the said master would answer questions concerning the selling of men and of women, Clement smiled and said, Yea, he will answer, for as he lives by selling thralls, and every time a thrall is sold by him he maketh some gain by it, it is to his profit that they change masters as often as may be. And when thou askest of the woman whom thou art seeking, he will be deeming that there will be some new chaffer ahead. I will bring thee to him, and thou shalt ask him of what thou wilt, and belike he will tell thee quietly over the wine-cup. Therewith was Ralph well content, and he grew eager to enter into the town. They came to the gates a little before sunset, after they had passed through much fair country. But nigh to the walls it was bare of trees and thickets, whereas said Clement that they had been cut down, lest they should serve to cover the strong thieves, or folk assailing the town. The walls were strong and tall, and a great castle stood high up on a hill, about which the town was builded, so that if the town were taken, there would yet be another town within it to be taken also. But the town within, save for the said castle, was scarce so fairly builded as the worst of the towns which Ralph had seen erst, though there were a many houses therein. Much people was gathered about the gate to see the merchants enter with banners displayed, and Ralph deemed many of the folk fair, such as were goodly clad, for many had but foul clouts to cover their nakedness, and seemed needy and hunger-pinched. Withal there were many warriors amongst the throng, and most of these bore a token on their sleeves, to wit a sword reddened with blood. And Clement, speaking softly in Ralph's ear, did him to wit that this was the token of the lord whom had gotten the castle in those days, and was tyrant of the town, and how that he had so many men-at-arms ready to do his bidding, that none in the town was safe from him if he deemed it more for his pleasure and profit to rob or maim or torment or slay than to suffer them to live peaceably. But with us chapmen, said Clement, he will not meddle, lest there be an end of chaffer in the town, and verily the market is good. Thus they rode through the streets into the market-place, which was wide and great, and the best houses of the town were therein, and so came to the hostel of the merchants, called the Fleece, which was a big house and goodly enough. The next morning Clement and the other chapmen went up into the castle, bearing with them gifts out of their wares for the lord. And Clement bade Ralph keep close till he came back, and especially to keep his war-caught thrall, Bull Shockhead, safe at home, lest he be taken from him, and also to clothe him in the guise of the chapmen lads, and to dock his hair. And even so Ralph did, though Bull were low there too. About noon the chapmen came back again well pleased, and Clement gave Ralph a parchment from the Lord, which bade all men help and let pass Ralph of Upmeads as a sergeant of the chapmen's guard, and said withal that now he was free to go about the town if he listed, so that he were back at the hostel of the Fleece by nightfall. So Ralph went in the company with some of the sergeants and others, and looked at this and that about the town without hindrance, save that the guard would not suffer them to pass further than the bailey of the castle. And for the said bailey, forsooth, they had but little stomach, for they saw thence on the slopes of the castle hill tokens of the cruel justice of the said lord. For there were men and women there, yea, and babes also, hanging on gibbets, and thrust through with sharp pails. And when they asked of folk why these had suffered, they but looked at them as if astonished, and passed on without a word. So they went thence, and found the master church, and deemed it not much fairer than it was great, and it was nowise great, albeit was a strange and uncouth of fashion. Then they came to the great gardens within the town, and they were exceedingly goodly, and had trees and flowers and fruits in them, which Ralph had not seen hitherto, as lemons and oranges and pomegranates, and the waters were running through them in the runnels of the ashlar, and the weather was fair and hot. So they rested in those gardens till it was evening, and then get them home to Fleece, where they had good entertainment. Chapter 24. Ralph heareth more tidings of the damsel. The second day, while the merchants saw to their chaffer, most of the men-at-arms, and Ralph with them, spent their time again in those goodly gardens. There indeed some of them made friends of fair women of the place, in which there was less risk than had been for aliens in some towns. At Cheaping Knowe, such women as were wedded according to the law, or damsels in the care of their kindred, or slaves who were concubines, had not dared so much as to look on a man. The third day time hung somewhat heavy on Ralph's hands, not but that the companions were well at ease, but rather because him seemed that he was not stirring in the quest. But the next day Clement bade him come see that thrall merchant aforesaid, and brought him to a corner of the market-place, where was a throng looking on at the cheaping. They went through the throng, and beside a stone like a leaping on stove saw a tall man, goodly of presence, black-bearded and clad in scarlet. This was the merchant, and by him were two of his knaves and certain weaponed men who had brought their wares to the cheaping. And some of these were arrayed like those foemen of the mountains. There was 63 of these chattels to be sold, who stood up one after the other on the stone, that folk might cheapen them. The cheaping was long about, because that they had a mind to buy were careful to know what they were buying, like as if they had been cheaping a horse. And most of them, before they bid their highest, had the chattels away into the merchant's booth to strip them, lest they should buy damaged or unhandsome bodies, and this more especially if it were a woman, for the men were already well nigh naked. Of women 4 of them were young and goodly, and Ralph looked at them closely, but they were not like to the woman of his quest. Now this cheaping irked Ralph sorely, as was like to be, whereas, as has been told, he came from a land where there were no thralls, none but vavasors and good yeomen. Yet he abode till all was done, hansel paid, and thralls led off by their new masters. Then Clement led him up to the merchant, to whom he gave the sally of the day, and said, Master, this is the young knight of whom I told thee, who deemed that a woman who was his friend hath been brought to this market and sold there, and if he might he would ransom her. The merchant greeted Ralph courteously, and bade him and Clement come into his house, where they might speak more privily. So did they, and he treated them with honor, and set wine and spices before them, and bade Ralph say what like the woman was. Ralph did so, and wondered at himself how well and closely he could tell of her, like as a picture painted. And moreover he drew forth that piece of her gown, which he had come on by the mid-mountain house. So when he had done, the merchant, who was a man sober of aspect, and somewhat slow of speech, said, Sir, I believe surely that I have seen this damsel, though she is not with me now, nor have I sold her ever. But hither was she brought to be sold by a man of the mountain folk, not very many days ago. And the man's name was Bull Nosy, or the long-nosed man of the kindred of the bull, for in such wise are named the men of that unhappy folk. Now this was the cause why I might not sell her, that she was so proud and stout, that men feared her, what she might do if they had her away. And when some spake to see her body naked, she denied it utterly, saying that she would do a mischief to whomever tried it. So I spake to him who owned her, and asked him if he thought it good to take her a while, and quell with her such pains as would spoil her but little, and then bring her to market when she was meeker. But he heeded my words little, and led her away, she riding on a horse, and he going afoot beside her, for the mountain men be no horsemen. Said Ralph, Dost thou know at all whither he will have led her? Said the merchant, By my deeming he will have gone first of all to the town of Whiteness, whither the fellowship will betake them ere long. For he will be minded to meet there the Lord of Utterbol, who is for such like wares. And he will either give her to him as a gift, for which he will have a gift in return, or he will sell her to my lord at a price if he dare to chaffer with him. At least so he will do if he be wise. Now if the said lord hath her, it will be somewhat more than hard for thee to get her again, till he have altogether done with her. For money and goods are naught to him besides the doing of his will. But there is this for thy comfort, that whereas she is so fair a woman, she will be well with my lord, for I warrant me that she will not dare to be proud with him, as she was with folk here. Yea, said Ralph, and what is this Lord of Utterbol, that all folk, men and women, fear him so? Said the merchant, Fair sir, thou must pardon me if I say no more of him. Belike thou mayst fall in with him, and if thou dost, take heed that thou make not thyself great with him. So Ralph thanked the merchant and departed with Clement, of whom presently he asked if he knew aught of this Lord of Utterbol. Said Clement, God forbid that I should ever meet him, save where I were many and he few. I have never seen him, but he is deemed by all men as the worst of the tyrants who vex these lands, and maybe the mightiest. So was Ralph sore at heart for the damsel. And anon he spake to Bull again of her, who deemed somewhat that his kinsman had been minded at the first to sell her to the Lord of Utterbol. And Ralph thinks his game a hard one, yet deems that if he could but find out where the damsel was, he might deliver her, what by sleight, what by boldness. This is the end of chapters 21 through 24 of Book 2 of The Well at the World's End, a tale by William Morris. In the next video, we will proceed to chapter 25 entitled, The Fellowship Comes to Whiteness. Thank you for listening.